It's the NUFC Monday Show. On today's episode, we're going to be looking at potential alternatives to Marc Guehi as the saga rumbles on with Crystal Palace. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome back to the NUFC Monday Show. Welcome back to the YouTube channel. Thanks so much to everybody who's joined the last couple of lives. The one on Friday was impromptu to react to the news of Marc Guehi and the latest bid, which is what we're going to sort of be touching on more today with the look at potential replacements. Lots of people joined that one. And then the instant reaction to the Southampton game as well. Thanks so much to everyone who joined them. Please continue to like, share and subscribe. As soon as you view this video, please hit the thumbs up. It really does help the algorithm. It really does help push the channel and grow the channel, and means that I can do more of these going forward. This is going to be the last Monday show, as I've mentioned on my channel update, which I'll put in the description again if you haven't checked it out. I will be taking a couple of weeks break as I'm going to Paris to cover the Paralympics from Friday, but here to talk about the centre-back situation, here to talk about Newcastle United and what they do, whether they go for Marc Guehi, whether they go for other alternatives, and then name and discuss a few of the alternatives as well today. I've asked for your input and lots of you got back in touch on Twitter and on Blue Sky as well. If you don't follow me on Blue Sky, by the way, I am on there, so go and check that out if you are, and also on YouTube as well. So thanks so much for all of your suggestions. I'm going to sort of talk a little bit about them, not go into too much statistical detail, just talk more about what I feel the defender might bring to the team, whether I think they're a good signing. There are some stats that I got from FB Ref which I'll stick on the screen for you to look at, but generally a lot of the defenders that are being looked at by Newcastle, including Marc Guehi, as you'll see, are not particularly in the higher percentiles for defensive actions. They're more in terms of what they can bring to the team in possession and an attacking sense. But I think really it's the eye test that really does this for me, and why I think Newcastle should be looking at certain players over Marc Guehi potentially, but also why I think Marc Guehi will be a good recruit for Newcastle if he does indeed join. And I still think, by the way, I'm going to caveat this, I still think Marc Guehi is the man that Newcastle want. I still think this is a deal that gets done, but I think we're at the point now, because of the Friday Live, when lots of people were saying now's the time to move on, because of the fact that he captained Crystal Palace against Brentford, and also the fact that Newcastle had Fabian Schär sent off, so he's going to miss 3 games. Newcastle's need for a defender has grown, which will mean probably that the price tag on Marc Guehi's head will have grown. As I say, there's still the context that Palace are in a position where they need to sell. But Steve Parish was talking about other clubs being involved, other clubs being interested, but that hasn't materialised in public. The fact that he's gone so public with Newcastle when Newcastle haven't said anything suggests that that is very much a tactic. The fact that Palace need to sell him to bring in Maxence Lacroix from Wolfsburg, which is closing in on, Kasunu as well from Bayer Leverkusen. Both names, by the way, were named to me when I asked for alternatives to Guehi, but it looks like Palace are moving ahead with those. They know he's not going to sign a new contract. The situation is still very much the same. They are bluffing, I think. They are projecting a more confident, more aggressive style of negotiation because they know Newcastle will still be at the table. Now, that's why I think Newcastle should look at potential alternatives. Not necessarily leave the table for Marc Guehi, just look at some other players. And there are plenty of other players. I think fundamentally where this comes from is that Newcastle signed Sven Botman for 32 million 2 seasons ago. They signed Bruno Guimaraes for 40 million. They've signed Anthony Gordon from 45 million. They've really strengthened their squad in key areas without going into this money beyond Alexander Isak and arguably Sandro Tonali. But Sandro Tonali was quite a bit cheaper than what Palace are asking for Marc Guehi. And that's where I think there is value in the market. I think, yes, it'll take those players longer to adapt and adjust, and maybe that's why they're going for a player who can guarantee or at least get as close to that. And also Guehi's reputation is also higher than it ever has been after such a successful European Championship campaign with England as well. But let's look at some of these different alternatives, starting with Sporting Lisbon defender Ousmane Diomande. For me, this is the person that I think Newcastle should look at most. Statistically, as you can see, is what I talk about the being better in terms of proficiency with ball in possession and pass completion, and higher percentiles than that than he is for blocks or for traditional defensive actions. But if you watch him, he's such a powerhouse. He's quick. He's 6'5", right-footed, but he also, as I said, can bring the ball out from the back. He stylistically is exactly what Newcastle are searching for, and his release clause is £68 million, which is lower than, by the sounds of it, Palace might push the deal for Marc Guehi. So in that term, he's easier to get, but I don't even think Newcastle would have to pay his release clause. Sporting Lisbon are a club built on the idea of getting high profit for players. The fact that he has got courted all over Europe by a lot of big clubs, he's ready for that step up, 20 years old, crucial to helping Sporting win the Portuguese title. Last season played 26 games. And he is ready for that step up, and I also think that Sporting would deal at a lower price. That's been what has been said over the course of the summer. So whether Newcastle could look at doing a deal closer to sort of 40 million, 45, it'd certainly be worth looking into. And I think, as I say, statistically, he may not come across as the obvious player, but neither does Marc Guehi. They don't stand up particularly well statistically, and that's just why I don't base my opinions on and base these videos on stats like a lot of people do, because I think there's more to it. The fact that he's played so much for a club that is ready for the step up at such a young age, the fact that he's so tall, so physically imposing, his long game and his short game in terms of passing is brilliant as well. He really would bring a different level to the Newcastle defence, and I think at this stage he's probably going to be cheaper than Marc Guehi. Yes, a bigger risk, if you like, because he isn't Premier League proven. He isn't, as I've mentioned in a couple of live streams, I don't like the idea of Premier League proven, but I think top 5 leagues proven is something, and we'll come on to Fikayo Tomori in that sense in a few minutes. But I think Diamonde is somebody who's definitely ready for this step up. He's impressed at Sporting Lisbon. Hugo Viana, former Newcastle midfielder, is their director of football. I think he would be interested in talking to Newcastle about a deal if this was possible. And I think, this is a player that has such a high ceiling, such a high reputation. Similar to Tino Livramento with Kieran Trippier, he could come in, maybe learn from Fabian Schär, adjust alongside Fabian Schär and Dan Burn until Sven Botman comes back, and then in the next couple of years he would be at the right age to take that mantle on and be a Newcastle centre-back alongside Botman for a decade. And that is not that is not an exaggeration. He is that good. Obviously, being Ivorian, he would be susceptible to going to the African Cup of Nations halfway through every other season. But I think that is worth what you get for such a powerful and elegant defender at that age. Second on the list is Malik Thiaw. We've obviously been through the statistical element of what he brings up. I'll put some more stats from FB Ref on the screen at the moment. But for me, Thiaw is stylistically very, very good. 22 years old. Price point much lower than either Diamonde or Guehi, crucially, and would allow Newcastle to look for a right midfielder. If you're going to get Thiaw in, you're going to also have a good go at getting a right midfielder in before the end of the window. But the issue with that is his experience at the top level. 22 games, 21 games for Milan. Has a mistake in him. I think he isn't particularly highly rated by a lot of Milan fans. But I think stylistically he absolutely works. Very similar to Tosin Adarabioyo, as I mentioned in the video I did on that. Again, I will link that video down in the description below where you want more of a tactical breakdown of Thiaw. I think Thiaw would definitely be an option and would also allow Newcastle to look further afield in terms of the right midfielder. But for me, it feels like Newcastle are really looking to go big on the centre-back at the moment, and he is somebody that they've looked at and talked about with Milan and talked about with his agents, and it hasn't become close. So I don't think this one is at the top of their list, because if it was, they would have got it done, especially considering that they're willing to spend so much on Guehi. I think this one's unlikely, but stylistically, he certainly makes sense. He's very young. He could improve. He could become a key player like under Eddie Howe, but I think his ceiling isn't quite as high as Guehi. It certainly isn't quite as high as Diamonde, so I think that he's an interesting option, but for me, not the right man. The third player on the list is Fikayo Tomori. Now, for me, this is a real steal if they can get him again. Stylistically, perfect. Can bring the ball up from the back. Good in terms of physicality and pace and recovery. I think he showed that particularly in the St James's Park game in the Champions League against Milan last season with that last-ditch tackle on Almiron. but also the game in the game at the San Siro, he was brilliant alongside actually Thiaw. So the pair of them have already shown Newcastle what they can do. But Tomori's got Premier League experience. He's definitely for me, England's missing link. He's the centre back that Gareth Southgate didn't give enough chances to. I think there's weakness in his game in terms of maybe concentration levels. Sometimes they're an issue, but stylistically, power, pace, good on the ball would definitely take Newcastle's defence to a higher level. And I think this one could be doable. I think if Milan are likely to sell one of them, it'll be Thiaw. But again, the context is Newcastle have proven they're willing to pay 60, 65 for Marc Guehi. I think if you went to the table with that offer for Kaya Tomori, I think absolutely you would get a deal done. I don't think he's quite worth that. I think you could look at doing something a little bit cheaper than that, but he's certainly a player who, if you're looking at Marc Guehi, you absolutely have to look at Tomori as well. And I think that at least look at that deal and look at a possibility of doing that. Newcastle have shown interest in the past, not as much as Thiaw, but he might well be the good middle ground between availability and somebody who Milan would be willing to sell, but also not quite at the expense of Guehi, and which is obviously causing the issue. I've also mentioned Antonio Silva from Benfica, who would be around 45, 50 million pounds. Again, I think he's a good player. I talked about him in a previous video, but I think he lacks the pace. He's not physically imposing enough. He's more of a ball-playing defender, which is great, but I think physically Newcastle needs somebody who's got that little bit of recovery pace, because in the first 20 minutes against Southampton, when they had 11 men, they were susceptible to Southampton creating chances and getting through the midfield and getting in behind. And I think that's why the defence is real. The issue with the defence is it needs to be somebody physical with a lot of pace, and I think that's why I wouldn't look at Antonio Silva as opposed to a few of these other names on this list. But Silva is a fantastic defender. He's very good one-on-one. He's very good with the ball at his feet. But as I say, I've mentioned in a previous video that I'm not sure he's the right man for Newcastle's specific predicament in defence. The final name I'm going to mention is Joe Gomez from Liverpool. Lots of reasons to tick this box. English player would not need time to settle in the Premier League. Can cover all bases at the back as well. Left back, right back and centre back. Versatile, but 27 years old. £45 million, lots of people talking about, and Liverpool need him to go to really progress their situation in terms of PSR. So I don't think Newcastle should be looking at this one too much for me. I don't think he's at the level of some of these other alternatives. £45 million is obviously a lot less than Guehi, but I think Guehi is closer to being worth £65 million than Joe Gomez is worth £45 million. I don't think Joe Gomez has got enough in him to start at a club in a Champions League chasing team. I think he's obviously very good. He's obviously played for England. He's obviously got quality, but I just think Newcastle need a game-changing defender in their centre-back search, and I think that at the price you're looking to pay for Joe Gomez, that simply isn't the case for me. Gomez is a good player, as I say, plays across the back, would certainly tick a lot of boxes, and I think Eddie Howe is a fan, but in terms of £45 million, when you're already looking at paying 65 for Guehi, and as I've mentioned, other players on this list you could get for around that, there are definitely better options on the continent. I think Newcastle have already shown that with Botman. There's definitely a lot more scouting that can be done. The list of players is Tapsoba, there's Todibo who's on the list. I mean, Todibo going to West Ham for 35 million as an obligation to buy next season seems like something that Newcastle should have been looking at, and I think lots of people have mentioned that. So there's got to be players out there, and so let me know in the comments who you'd want. The point I'm trying to make is that there's options abroad, there's options on the continent who could come in. I appreciate and agree that Marc Guehi would instantly impact Newcastle in a positive way, and I actually do still think this isn't a contradiction to last week's video. I still think this deal gets done if Newcastle want it. I still think that Palace are trying a risky game when they're talking. This is a situation that Palace are trying to engineer. Newcastle have to stay calm. They have to be brave. If they want Guehi, they can get that deal done. But hopefully, as you've seen in this video, there are plenty of other alternatives. Thanks so much for joining me on this video. Please like, share and subscribe. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Different options out there if Newcastle are not going to pursue this Guehi deal any further. I think they're getting to a point where they have to either wrap the deal up or move on. A lot of people are saying that nothing else is happening in the background, or they're concerned that if they walk away from Guehi, they've got no momentum. Don't panic. Newcastle will be fine even if they do have to move on. Thanks so much for joining me. Like, share, and subscribe. As I say, I'll be back this week with a final transfer live show. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you then. Cheers.